Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Beneath the Surface. Today we'll be asking, what's so funny? Joining us on the show is Nashashebi, an award-winning journalist and analyst on Arab affairs. Thank you for joining us, Sharif.
Thank you.
Please explain to us what free speech is.
Well, it's the right to say what you want, but the controversy around the Charlie Hebdo cartoons is that there is no such thing as unlimited free speech. There are legal parameters, there are moral parameters, ethical parameters. So the debate has been misconstrued as something as if the free speech is unlimited and this is trampling on that right. There is no right that's unlimited. So the debate really should be the limits to free speech and the double standards in applying free speech.
So when you say double standards, in what way?
Well, for example, I did studies on the portrayal of Muslims in the British press, and they were described in ways that simply wouldn't be acceptable for Jews or any other community. And as a test, I remember I was giving a talk at an event one time, and I basically was saying things to the audience about Jews and blacks. And they were so disgusted by what I was saying, some of them walked out, some of them started heckling me. But all I was doing was actually quoting things that were said about Muslims in the British press. I just replaced the word Muslim with Jew or black. They were disgusted because it would be unacceptable to talk about Jews or blacks that way. But that's how the British press, the mainstream British press, were talking about Muslims. So the point here is you can say things about Muslims that you simply wouldn't say about other communities.
Is it because other communities have been through a tragic event, such as the Jews have been through the Holocaust and the black race have been through slavery, whereas the Muslims haven't been through a certain obstacle or tragedy which would make them not speak about them negatively, which is kind of like giving them a green card in a way?
I mean, how many tragedies can we count in the Muslim world? Look at Iraq. For the last 20 years, how many Iraqis have died? Look at the Algerian War of Independence. There are what's happening in Syria now. These are catastrophes, all of them. The Palestinians.
But it's not really seen as a catastrophe worldwide. It's not really, acknowledged by the world as something really bad for the Muslims.
Well, I think part of the reason is that we are a relatively younger community in the West. So I think there is still an adjustment period where people still view us as more of an other than other communities. So I think there still needs to be time for us to assert ourselves, our rights in the West, and for the West to accept us as a fully integrated community. That takes time. I think because we're younger than other communities, that hasn't fully happened yet. But I would like to think that there'll come a time where things that are said about Muslims now would be not considered in the future.
But then, when we do look at how they speak about Muslims, and many shows have actually spoken about how every Muslim, even if they don't agree with what took place in Paris, and I imagine that the majority of people don't agree with what took place, but we should all apologize.
No, look, why should I apologize for something that someone else did? I didn't do it, so why should I? I mean, this is a racist, bigoted view that just because someone who happens to be Muslim did something wrong, that every other Muslim in the world has to apologize for it. I mean, why? There should be no more or less responsibility on Muslims to condemn those acts as anyone else. They're condemnable acts, but not. There should be no special responsibility on Muslims. Why? I mean, for example, if I don't publicly come out and condemn it, why should it be assumed that I support such an act just because I'm Muslim? This is a bigoted view. There should be no special responsibility. And the thing with the Charlie Hebdo incident, it's not even specifically a Muslim issue. I mean, it's interesting that Christian groups have come out against the provocations of the Charlie Hebdo cartoons. The Pope came out and said, that people's religion should not be mocked. So this is an issue of religion, what religion means to people. Even if you are not religious, you can still appreciate how fundamental religion is to people's lives. So to have the right to criticize someone's religion doesn't mean you have the duty to do it. And if you live in a multicultural society, which places like Britain and the US are and should be, what purpose does it serve for someone to gratuitously offend a community just because they have the right to do it? This is like being in a playground. I mean, this is infantile. So, I mean, for example, I have the right to insult your parents, but why would I? I mean, what point does it prove? Just to assert that I have the right to? Freedom of speech comes with responsibility. Every right comes with responsibility. We can't look at one side of the coin without the other. So.
Of course, but then, like, when we look at the situation that actually did take place, don't you actually ask yourself, why did he decide to do, caricatures about the Holy Prophet when in 2006, when the Danish decided to do it, people reacted in a very violent way, which of course none of us support, but it still took place. Why do you think in 2015 they decided to do such a thing?
Well, even, a few years ago, Charlie Hebdo's offices were firebombed for provocative cartoons. So I think it's just a sense of defiance to say, we can do it, so we must. And that's irresponsible. So, and again, it's interesting that you raised the Charlie Hebdo and the Danish newspaper that published the cartoons, because, for example, Charlie Hebdo fired one of its colleagues a few years ago for publishing content that was deemed anti-Semitic. The Danish newspaper said that they would not publish cartoons that were offensive to Christians or Jews. So this is not about free speech, it's about double standards in applying free speech. Why is one community open for targeting and others are not? This is the case. And even with the Danish cartoons, this was completely overlooked. It was again portrayed simply as an issue of freedom of speech, where it actually was an issue of hypocrisy.
But then with that, can't we actually take them to court, for example, or just say out, loud and clear that they're just targeting the Muslim community and nobody else?
Well, no, the law comes in if you're inciting violence, if you're inciting hatred, but the thing,
but that is kind of hatred, no?
Well, that's the thing. It's a grey area. It's each country has different parameters about how it's done. So it's not a black and white issue. And so this is why, and particularly in secular countries such as France, where this happened, I think the parameters, where you go beyond and enter the territory of incitement to hatred is probably further out than in other countries. So there is a lot of room for people to gratuitously offend. And where it comes to religion, many people, not just Muslims, many people feel very strongly that their religion means a lot in their lives and that it's very offensive to them to have it criticized. But it goes beyond offense. When you have a community that is specifically targeted over a long period of time, there is a very deep sense of insecurity. It's not just about criticizing on religion. It goes to the very heart of your status in a country. If you're a minority in a country and the majority not just feels it has the right to offend, but consistently offends your community in particular, you will worry about your status in that country, especially in for instance, in Europe, where you have far-right parties that are coming up. So it's, look at it in the sense that, for example, if someone in a minority, in Britain, let's say, criticizes British values or British society at large is not going to feel threatened because they're the majority. Their status is not under question. The opposite is not, the reverse is not the case. If the majority is constantly stigmatizing one particular minority, they really will feel that they have no place in that society. So you have to look at it. The situation is not the same if you are part of a majority as opposed to part of a minority.
So do you think because they're a minority and because they are constantly targeted that this is the way they would react to a situation?
Well, they will react certainly in a much more defensive manner than if they were the majority in the community. That's a fact. There's no two ways about it.
But then when we look at the actual situation and how the terrorists actually went to commit their act. The fact that someone was actually able to film this and it was taking place, in a very open space, don't you think that, like, where was the security? Where was the French police, for example?
I mean, this is conspiracy territory.
I'm not conspiracy, but it's just asking, like, where are they? Because if someone...
I don't know. I mean,
no, in London, for example...
filming, everyone has a camera, has a phone. I mean, filming anything is very easy. So
but then if someone's walking down the road with a gun in London, which everyone in London is concerned with themselves, and, if someone says hi to you, that's amazing. But if someone is holding a gun, wouldn't they be yelling or something?
But they came out of a car with the guns. They weren't walking down a high street with the guns. So,
that's true.
I don't buy your...
No, I'm not saying it's conspiracy. I'm just questioning, like, where was the government at this time? For a country to be very, high advanced with this security, I would imagine that there should have been better. Not saying that they're funded by the government or anything.
A car pulls up suddenly. People come out with guns. How would the state have been able to predict that?
I don't know. That's what I wanted you. That's what I wanted you to answer.
No, I don't think there's any conspiracy behind it. I mean,
no, I'm not saying it's conspiracy. I'm just asking, where was the government? If you're saying that it's very difficult.
Is the government supposed to be on every street in the country? I mean,
well, it kind of already is in a way.
No, come on. I mean, if someone is in a car and there is a gun in the car, how is a street camera going to pick up the gun? I mean, I'm sure that they were not waving the gun out of the window. So I don't think it was a case of lax security. I don't no. I mean, this was a terrible act. Terrorist acts by nature catch states and people by surprise. I don't think that the conclusion can be drawn that the state is somehow complicit in providing a lack of security that allows that to happen.
But going back to the actual event and the fact that, they wanted to print them and they did, and then they got attacked and then they reprinted, and there were like queues of people just standing wanting to buy that copy. Don't you think that this is going to create more hate within the community? Well,
this highlights the stupidity of the attackers. They must have known that this attack was going to suddenly thrust this publication, which was a kind of nothing publication, thrust it into the international spotlight, and now it's selling in the millions. It's being sold out, thanks to the attackers. So I mean, their logic behind attacking this magazine is just ludicrous, and the irony is that this magazine, which really has this Islamophobic agenda, owes its popularity now to these attackers. It's supposed to be challenging government, and it's now printed by the government, and it has all these supporters and these world leaders who are marching in Paris, who all oppress free speech and independent journalism. So the whole thing is really ironic.
How come people are now, identifying with Charlie Hebdo?
I mean, this is something I have a big issue with. I mean, you can condemn the attack without endorsing the publication. I mean, it is a racist publication whose basis is to provoke people. So, I mean, why should I be Charlie? I mean, I'm completely against the attack, but it doesn't mean that I should embrace the ethos of this publication. I think what I had a problem with was this slogan of "Je suis Charlie." People were jumping on it without thinking. It was this knee-jerk reaction that they had to express solidarity. But then, I know many people who would put "Je suis Charlie" on their Facebook accounts, or whatever, who I know would never endorse the kind of provocative content that the magazine had. So stop and think, what does "Je suis Charlie" mean? Are you really Charlie? Or do you just find the attack condemnable? There's two different things.
But that's what sometimes happens, like because they're against the attack, they tend to use that slogan without actually thinking further of what, Charlie actually stands for. So maybe that's the issue that...
Well, this is something, this is, again, the stupidity of the attackers. They caused a racist, offensive publication to get worldwide support because what they did to the publication was simply unacceptable. It boggles the mind to think that they never even considered that might be the case.
Well, then, of course, because they're going to think that they're going to be able to kill everyone, which is going to make people scared. That would have mainly been their intention, I think. But then with that, it kind of created more hate towards the Muslims themselves.
I mean, if you look at other examples like the Danish cartoons, things like that, we see from past experience that these reprehensible attacks only create more publicity for these publications. So, however angry you are about it, I cannot see that they're not aware that if the aim is to silence these publications, that these kind of actions do exactly the opposite.
Well, they actually did do the opposite with that. But then the question that always comes to mind is, why attack the Prophet? Like, okay, you don't like Muslims. There are a certain group of Muslims, worldwide that are committing terrorist acts. But then so are many Christian groups and so many Jewish groups. So why just the Muslims themselves?
Well, okay, on the issue of the Prophet, I think, again, this comes down to defiance, because they know that for Muslims, that's a red line, okay? And if someone wants to be provocative in a country where, freedom of speech is valued, to them, that's the bullseye. They can assert themselves as, in such a way, because they know that's going to create a reaction. And let's face it, these satirical publications, these provocative publications, they thrive on provoking. That's the aim. That's what sells. So to them, the Prophet is the red line. So crossing that red line creates this big uproar, which creates publicity. Obviously, it doesn't mean that they should be killed for it, but they want a reaction, and that's what they're getting.
Why don't they do it with other groups as well? Or is it just from the Muslim community to show the whole violence and hatred within the religion?
Well, again, because there is a sense in the West that you can say things about Muslims that you couldn't about other minorities and get away with it. So I think that's what it comes down to. You can be offensive and get away with it. You couldn't say those things about other communities. So it's like open season. It's an easy target.
So then what do you think would be the best way? Like, we do say that, we should keep silent about it, etc. But then being silent is only going to allow them to do more and more.
It's not an either or of killing people
of
or being silent.
Of course, not killing. That's even off the table.
Not just killing, but even burning flags and attacking embassies. What happened with the Danish cartoons.
No, that's also a no-no.
But people resort to that. So it's not either that or keep quiet. We can as a community, as individuals, we can raise our concerns. But there are so many different ways that you can do that. That will generate a mature and realistic debate. And the debate will go on. This is not the last time that offensive cartoons and content is going to be published. So, as a community, as individuals, people need to sit back and think, what is the best way to voice our concern, even our anger about this, but in a way that's responsible, that elicits a proper debate, and that doesn't it doesn't result in both sides of the coin, having this knee-jerk defensiveness. And this is the problem as well with these provocative cartoons, is people become defensive. As a Muslim community, people become defensive, whereas, deep down they might have very real internal issues about kind of reform in the community. Suddenly they feel embattled and endangered, and everyone closes ranks. So, there has to be a mature evaluation of reactions to these issues, because they're going to happen again and again. And so far, the kind of reactions that have been taking place, unfortunately, there only need to be a few extremists in terms of reacting to get all the publicity, and then suddenly everyone starts asking yet again, why aren't the Muslims condemning it? Well, they're doing it all the time, but everyone's so focused on these extremists that gets lost. So
that does get lost, and that's the other thing, that the amount of scholars, be it Sunni, Shia, even many other groups and sects within the Islamic religion, have condemned. When ISIS first, became ISIS, they're the first people that went to the streets and were condemning and saying, these are not us, these don't represent us. However, that's been overlooked completely.
Yes, and this is the problem. I mean, you still get people saying, why aren't Muslims condemning? Which either means they're completely ignorant about this torrent of condemnation, or they refuse to listen. I don't know what's worse. But it's now leading to a backlash where a lot of Muslims are saying, well, why should I condemn it just because you demand it from me?
That's
And
the
why
thing.
should it be assumed that I support such an act unless I go on TV and condemn it? So again, this is what I'm talking about. When these kind of reactions lead to a defensiveness that is not helpful on either side. But certainly, I mean, I find it very disturbing that with, I mean, it's so easy to find all these instances of condemnation that you have people who really should know better saying, where are the Muslims? It's like, well, we're everywhere. What more do you want us to do? Dance on the TV screen and condemn it? It's completely illogical.
Not just that, it's the point that why should we complain? Why should we, apologize? Like, what's the point of me as, yes, I wear a headscarf, yes, I'm a Muslim, but then what's my apology going to be doing?
Well, we shouldn't. I mean, I don't think that we should. I think people that do, I think it comes out of a genuine sense of fear, of a backlash. I mean, we are a minority, and I mean, look at all the reprisal attacks in France and other countries since the Charlie Hebdo incident. That they haven't been covered, but there have been many reprisal attacks, so people are scared. But again, I don't see why should I apologize for something that I don't condone, that I had nothing to do with, just because of my faith. It's illogical. But unfortunately, for instance, you have people like Rupert Murdoch, who is an international media mogul, saying, well, Muslims should be responsible as long until they wipe out the cancer within them, that they should all be responsible. I mean, what the hell is he talking about? This is ridiculous. And Piers Morgan, who again, I mean, he is an established media figure saying, well, why aren't the Muslims condemning it? It's like, I despair when these people who are supposed to be very influential media people show, I mean, in Rupert Murdoch's case, prejudice, and in Piers Morgan's case, a lack of knowledge that he should have.
That's the thing, that the fact that, influential people and figures are coming out and saying these things, it just makes the people who are ignorant or don't know much about the Muslim community just, more ignorant than they actually are to begin with, which is a big problem for us. The fact that so many mosques are being attacked, in London and in France is a really big problem. And as you said, they're not really being covered. It's just, a word of mouth that we're actually hearing.
And I'm fairly certain that these attacks are carried out by people who held those views about Muslims before Charlie Hebdo, and this has given them, in their mind, a justification to carry out those attacks. And this is what I find so distressing, and I think people overlook this in terms of the freedom of speech rights issue, is that this prolonged demonization of a community leads to individuals, and quite a few individuals, holding such negative views about Muslims that they're looking for any excuse to target them. So when something like this happens, you suddenly get all these reprisal attacks. And people don't look, they look at the Charlie Hebdo incident as a singular incident that was tragic, but they don't look at the long-term effect of these kind of portrayals, the long-term effect it has on wider society and how they view a minority like the Muslim.
But then how is it going to affect society later on?
Well, eventually, if you keep seeing a community or individuals from that community portrayed negatively, consistently, then people will automatically assume without thinking that everyone from that community must be like that. There must be a grain of truth in all this because it keeps being regurgitated. So this is the real problem, is that people end up associating things like, in the case of Muslims, terrorism, religious fanaticism, with the faith and with adherence to that faith.
But then with the Charlie Hebdo incident, you had a Muslim policeman, make sure that no one was killed. So he actually died defending, other people. So in that sense, doesn't it make things less of,
again, in that case, and it wasn't just him. The guy who saved the shoppers in the kosher supermarket was also Muslim. And this is my problem. In the media, the religion of the attackers was integral to the story. Everyone knew that they were Muslim. But the fact that the policeman and this guy in the kosher supermarket were Muslim, that wasn't as prevalent. That wasn't integral to their identity. So this is my problem, is that it seems that someone's Muslim faith, it seems to be more important in a negative context than in a positive one. And I worry because this gives the impression that there are people in the media with agendas, that they don't want Muslims portrayed positively. It suits them to portray them negatively. And when a Muslim does a very good deed, it's not given the same prominence.
No, it wasn't, because like with the two Muslims that actually saved others, that I actually we read about it from small sources and small companies that don't really have that big name out there. And even like when with Fox News, for example, when the Charlie Hebdo incident took place, and then afterwards that Christian guy that was saying he's Christian identified himself as Christian, they didn't really they removed when they kept speaking about the incident, they'll be like, no, he's not Christian because he's not representing the Christian faith. Whereas when they're speaking about the Muslims, they're saying no, they are Muslims, and they're making sure that they're Muslims.
Oh. So overall, when you look at people's impressions of this incident, it is that it is an issue of Islamic extremism and terrorism. Whereas you could just as well look at it as an issue of Muslim heroism. The two, the policeman and the person in that shop, they were the heroes in the story. But no one thinks about that. When they think of Charlie Hebdo, they think of murder, they think of these extremists. And that's, you could look at it either way, but unfortunately the prominent view seems to be the negative connotation.
So do you think as Muslims we should mainly focus on those two men instead of course, the terrorists?
It's very difficult because, we Muslims have a dual battle to face. Certainly we have an internal battle because, it's not, extremists do us more harm than anyone else in our midst. And we're not talking just about terrorist attacks within the Muslim world from jihadist groups and whatnot. Of course, Muslims are the biggest targets of them, but also in the West, because you have, it can take one person to commit an atrocity that suddenly the whole community is blamed for. But this is the quandary that we're in, is that we recognize that, we're the last people who want these extremists to tar us with the same brush. But also then you get all these kind of racist, bigoted views kind of all coming at us, and then we suddenly feel that as a community we have to close ranks. So it's almost like a schizophrenic reaction. What do? I mean, we know we have to kind of look out for our own, but we know we have to kind of expunge these extremists from our midst. So it's a very difficult situation that the community is in, and that's why I have a problem with this people who make all this fuss about Islamic extremism and then they blame the entire community. I just think, well, if you actually want something to be done, the community is not going to help if they feel that they are being lumped in the same group as the extremists. So
not just that, but then how can we actually help? Like, I imagine if any of us knew who the extremists were, we would report them, because they're not only affecting us, but they're affecting our whole religion. And not just that, they're going to our countries back home and killing innocent people over there. So it would actually benefit us more than them.
Well, for example, the government tries to encourage the community to inform them if they see extremism and things like that. But again, the problem is that many people in the community feel that the government stigmatizes them. So there's this kind of, again, it's a strange situation that they don't want the extremists around them, but then they don't trust the government either. There are many ways in which Muslims feel alienated, not just in Britain and France, but in other countries in the West. So it's difficult for them to come forward very easily to a state where they feel the government doesn't look out for their rights and their views. And then there's also the issue of what people categorize as extremist. I mean, that's a very grey area. Someone's version of extremism might be completely different to someone else's. So it's easier said than done. I think it's a very difficult situation.
That is true, but then when we hear people on TV publicly, like on Channel 4 or on ITV or on BBC, saying that they want to make sure that Britain becomes Muslim, that becomes an Islamic country, and it goes on to saying that they're willing to kill people to do that. Shouldn't they be arrested, or is that...
Well, if they say that people should be killed in that pursuit, then they would be arrested, because that is incitement to murder. If they just say that they want Britain to be a Muslim country, that doesn't cross that line. But there is nothing more damaging to Muslims as a minority in this country for these people to say we want Britain to be a Muslim country, because that provides all the ammunition that UKIP and people like that need to say, oh look, this is the Muslim agenda in this country. They don't want to live with us, they live among us and with us. They want to rule us. That's the most dangerous thing, and it makes me so angry, because it's, in a very sick way, it's almost like these far-right bigots and these really ignorant kind of Muslim extremists are almost in bed together, because they fuel off each other. They breed fear among both sides that gives them the ammunition to keep up the cause. And unfortunately, they tend to get the biggest prominence. They are the loudest people, and moderates tend to get kind of drowned out among all that. So it's a real problem.
But then when they're to like show hate, because I doubt that they have said to kill, but like to divide people, etc., and to make sure that, for example, on BBC One, there was one individual saying that they want to make sure that the caliphate comes and it stays in London. Knowing that the caliphate is going to be, using terrorist acts or using violence, isn't that a way that they can at least, make sure that these people are, less on the street, or that they're, put away somewhere?
I mean, I'm not an expert in the law in terms of that, so I'm not sure. But I don't think the government would be particularly lax if there was any inclination about an incitement to murder or violence. I don't think they would turn a blind eye to it. But again, I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know the exact point. But I think part of the problem with this issue in Britain and other countries is that often the wording in these laws is not straightforward. I don't think you really can make it straightforward. I think people can very easily make their words nuanced to avoid falling into trouble. So it's always going to be something that's open to interpretation. So that's why I think the debate is going to be something we're going to have for a very long time, because there are not clear-cut rules about when and when not to cross those lines.
That is true, but then when we look at, you said that it's a very grey area. If Muslims were to, report people, but they don't have the evidence, it's just from what they were saying and how they were saying it, how are they meant to take them to court or report them? Wouldn't the people that are reporting, they're going to be in trouble, for example?
It would depend what they've seen or heard. I mean, it's difficult to say. It's not, again, this would be on a case-by-case basis. So it's, I don't know. We'd have to look at a specific example and say what happened. But again, these things often are not kind of made public. So.
Okay, when it's Yasir Habib, for example, and it's Anjem Choudhury, which one from the Shia sect and one from the Sunni sect, both of them have made it very clear that they're against one another in the sect, in the sense of they hate one another's sect, and that they're willing to do anything to make sure that Britain becomes a Muslim country. What can we as a community report to the police to make sure that these two people or figures are put away, for example?
Well, in these cases of public figures, I mean, I don't think there's a necessity to report to the police, because these people they're very proud of their views. They get a lot of media attention about the views. So I think it's just a matter of Muslims kind of making clear to those people, it doesn't have to be to wider society, it's to those people that you don't represent us. And the more non-Muslims that hear this, the better. Because unfortunately, these people who are this fringe fanatic minority, they want to be portrayed as representatives of the community. So we should be the first people to tell them, you don't speak in our name, and to inform others who believe that they do, to say no, they don't represent us at all.
Well, then we say that, but then when we, our scholars and everyone is condemning big acts like groups like ISIS, no one's really, remembering that. So how is it going to be when we do it to people in our community?
We have to keep trying, and we have to keep pointing out that they're not listening. I mean, this has to be done. It's that you have to constantly point out to people who say that, look at all these times we've condemned, today, yesterday, last week, make them realize, make them feel ashamed to have said something like that when there is such a body of evidence to the contrary.
But then with, Piers Morgan, for example, have you or other people, written back?
Okay, for example, Piers Morgan, in my article that I wrote for Al Jazeera on the Charlie Hebdo thing, I quoted him along the lines of, why aren't the Muslims condemning it? And I said that him and people like him were either ignorant or they were refusing to listen. Those are exactly the words I used. He tweeted on Twitter that my article was a very well argued article. So, he could have said, "Oh no, this is a terrible piece." But I mean, I gave him kudos for having the maturity to, given that I criticized him in the article, to say this is a very good article. And he tweeted that. Lots of people read it. So you can make a difference in this respect. I think there are people who will say, "Why aren't the Muslims condemning?" out of ignorance, and I think those people, you can change their minds. Obviously, people with an agenda to say that Muslims aren't condemning, that's going to be much more difficult. But I think we need to keep trying and to get to the people who really don't realize how much condemnation for Muslims there is.
Do you think with this attack, that people in Britain have become more aware of the Muslim community, in the sense that they're actually saying that these terrorists do not represent the whole Muslim community?
It's I don't know, it's hard to say, because it's not like there are so many issues within Britain or the West and within the Muslim world that gives attention to Islam and to Muslim communities, but for all the wrong reasons. And Charlie Hebdo again is an example. So it's getting people's attention, but it's reinforcing this idea that Islam equals violence. So this is the problem. It's not the attention we're getting, it's the type of attention that we're getting.
It is that, but then on the LBC, for example, when one of the people was saying that Muslims have to condemn, and then the host was saying no, that they don't, you have to condemn as well. That kind of created, a better feeling for the Muslims, in the sense that even, the people that are not really Muslim themselves, they're not Muslim at all, and who don't really know much about Islam, are still defending in a way.
Yeah, and it's important to, I know that example from LBC, that was very widely circulated on social media. I just worry though that for every person who commends and spreads that, there's going to be someone else who's going to be spreading Fox News on the same social media, saying some very ridiculous things. So I think it's a matter of really using, I think social media is so important on this issue, is to really use our social media presence to push these examples of people, particularly anyone who's eloquent, who stands up for these issues and makes other, like on this LBC, for this LBC example, the presenter made that caller look foolish. This is really important to spread those examples. Otherwise, you're going to be inundated with the Fox News pundits who, one of them said that Birmingham is a Muslim-only city and rubbish like that. So I think it's social media is crucial in this respect.
It is, and with Fox News, the only person who's actually able to answer them is kind of like Russell Brand. But other than that, nobody else, because nobody else is is having that power to do so in a way.
Well, I think anyone, see, this is the thing with social media, is that now everyone potentially has an international platform. So obviously, yes, Russell Brand is a celebrity, but you can share your views worldwide in an instant. So I think it's important that, and again, when we're using social media, don't think about what you're going to say, how you say it, but get your point across. But if you're outraged, don't make offensive comments yourself. You have to always conduct yourself in a way that do you really want someone else to listen? And if you want them to listen, don't offend. Don't do the same thing that got you offended in the first place. I mean, as an example, for instance, in terms of letter writing campaigns to the media. I mean, people would send me all sorts of letters they'd write to the media, criticizing them for being, anti-Muslim or anti-Arab or whatever. But their language would be so kind of angry and confrontational. And I would tell them, look, you might be completely justified in being angry, but they're not going to read this letter. This language, they're not going to read it. You have to to write it in a way that they'll want to read it and they will reply to you and they will actually consider of your views. But if you're going to make big claims and use very harsh language, they don't have a duty to read the letter or respond to it. So you have to encourage a dialogue rather than mimicking the way that they behave, and suddenly you have two very different sides that don't talk to each other.
Of course, and that is kind of like what the Prophet taught us himself, because he was attacked, from when he was first given the prophecy until he passed away, and until today he's attacked. So with that, we kind of know, but of course others take it differently. But then when we look at the media, for example, when they was looking at the actual event, it was focusing more on the Jewish community being under attack instead of the Muslim. Don't you think with that, a Muslim would get offended in the sense that, or angry even, in the sense that, firstly they were hated, they were offended. Secondly, two people were killed within the community and nobody really, covered it. And then thirdly, that the Jewish community is more focused on as being under attack instead of the Muslim, when so many, mosques are being threatened themselves.
I mean, I think Muslims should have been angry about the lack of coverage of reprisal attacks, completely regardless of how the Jewish community was portrayed. Because even if there was no Jewish angle to the story whatsoever, the fact would still be that there were lots of reprisal attacks. There still continue to be reprisal attacks that are not covered. That's a problem, regardless of what any other community has to do with the story. And that's a real issue. But, again, for instance, there are many, on social media, many Jews that I know on social media who have written fantastic critiques of how the issue has been covered from all sorts of angles. So I think we have to be careful not to start drawing lines that make other communities and minorities feel defensive about what happened. So I think we should focus on the fact that the portrayal of Muslims was not just lacking in its in the amount of content, but in what content was chosen to be the focus.
That's the thing, and it's not just that. They're not many of the people that were offended. It wasn't because they're focusing on the Jewish, and that was actually the reason. Sorry, that they're focusing on one group but not focusing on the other. They have the right to focus on the Jewish community, which is of course their right. But then the Muslim isn't. They're not really focusing on the Muslim community.
Yeah, but again, I don't find this helpful, because then you are drawing some kind of confrontational thing between the Jewish and Muslim communities. Whereas, for example, Jews would also not like to have their religion mocked in the way that Muslims do. So instead of making some kind of confrontation that we could easily avoid, focus on the fact that coverage should have been different. And not kind of alienating the Jewish community, but trying to get a consensus. For instance, I mean, getting that the Christian figures have been saying, look, religion it's dear to people, and it shouldn't be mocked, and people should think about the repercussions and effects of that. Why wouldn't Jews feel the same way as Christians and Muslims do feel about that? So better to bring them in and to make this a much wider issue, rather than saying it's Muslims here and then Jews there and Christians there. I mean, don't separate. There is a common ground there, generally of people of faith who would not want their religion mocked. So bring them in rather than saying, what about that community? And I think this is a more constructive way of doing it.
Thank you very much for being with us, Sharif, and thank you very much for watching Beneath the Surface. See you next time.